Good evening. We're going to start. Thank you very much for coming here. And thank you very much to Stiftung. This is the second November talks. After Bernard Curie, we asked Sebastian Irarrazaval from Chile to come in Italy for us. But he's here not only because of the November talks, but also because he's one of the visiting professors for the master degree course here at the Iuav. And so we combine both the occasions. He's also one of the friends from Chile of the Iuav. And this evening, I asked Alberto Ferlenga and Renato Bocchi to introduce and also to start a dialogue with Sebastian Irarrazaval. Thanks to Antonio Romano that for Stiftung promote this conversation, this lecture. Please, Alberto.
Well, the lecture by Sebastian will be given in English, my introduction in Italian. Intanto grazie a voi che siete venuti e grazie a Sebastian. È anche un piacere particolare, al di là dell'interesse crescente che questa serie di lezioni sta avendo. È un piacere particolare avere Sebastian perché ci sono alcuni architetti che appartengono a una sorta di famiglia Iuav, quantomeno noi intendiamo che appartengano a una sorta di famiglia Iuav, perché in momenti diversi sono stati vicino a noi per degli wave, Sebastian oggi anche tenendo un corso e così via. Insomma, un gruppo di persone nel mondo che, soprattutto partendo da Wave, ha costruito questa sorta di comunità di intenti che non solo si incontra in alcuni momenti, ma che condivide anche, credo, alcune questioni importanti. E io molto brevemente dirò qualcosa rispetto a questo. Comincerò dicendo che se noi dovessimo pensare di tracciare una sorta di nuova geografia del mondo per quanto riguarda l'architettura e i luoghi in cui l'architettura in determinate condizioni emerge, dovremmo probabilmente stravolgere quella a cui siamo abituati. Stravolgere quella, per esempio, che ha individuato in alcune patrie deputate i luoghi della modernità. Specificatamente l'Europa, gli Stati Uniti in un certo periodo, il Giappone in un altro periodo. Quelle sono state in alcuni momenti e per molti anni vere e proprie patrie di un'idea di rinnovamento dell'architettura che si è poi rivolta al mondo intero e è stata poi ripresa in luoghi diversi. Beh, oggi non è più così, lo dico in un modo molto netto, questa affermazione avrebbe bisogno poi di una serie di considerazioni, ma molto seccamente, molto radicalmente vi propongo l'idea che in questo momento queste antiche patrie stiano producendo sì una buona architettura, anzi un'architettura sempre migliore dal punto di vista della raffinatezza, dal punto di vista della capacità di portare a un grado sempre maggiore di perfezione i propri risultati, ma anche, in fin dei conti, sempre più maniera di se stessa o maniera di qualche cosa che c'era prima e sempre meno necessaria rispetto a quelle che sono le esigenze non solo dei luoghi in cui sorge l'Europa di centri storici ormai preda di un turismo che li sta dilaniando e che nessuno sta più di tanto interpretando, l'Europa delle periferie separate che stanno producendo nuova divisione sociale, eccetera, eccetera. Insomma, un'architettura che esprime se stessa al massimo livello della raffinatezza, della perfezione, al massimo livello della possibilità per un'opera architettonica di essere presentata su una rivista oggi, ma che però non è più di tanto in grado di intervenire su questioni specifiche. Ora, questo sarebbe un disastro in qualche modo se ci limitassimo a questa considerazione. Però è da diversi anni che in altre parti del mondo invece sta producendosi qualcosa di differente, qualcosa anche di più interessante. Sono embrioni, sono sperimentazioni, sono momenti particolari che non a caso, io credo, stanno accadendo nei luoghi del mondo in cui più fortemente e senza mediazioni batte la crisi economica, la crisi ambientale, la crisi sociale, eccetera, eccetera. Io penso che non sia un caso che in alcuni di questi luoghi, che possono essere ascritti a una generica idea di sud, poi in realtà alcuni sono est, alcuni sono ovest rispetto all'Europa, ma a una generica idea di alterità rispetto a quella centralità di cui parlavo prima, stiano invece accadendo delle cose di un certo interesse. E stanno accadendo, come vi dicevo, direttamente in rapporto con una situazione che è una situazione fortemente mutata nel mondo. Molto mutata anche dal momento in cui invece sorse poi l'architettura moderna, sulla base di un'idea di sviluppo che era diversa, sulla base di un'idea di economia e di socialità che era diversa. Oggi facciamo i conti con altre questioni e sicuramente facendo i conti con altre questioni alcuni dei nostri punti di riferimento si sono allontanati molto fortemente dalla centralità in cui noi stessi viviamo. Sarebbe lungo fare una descrizione di questo mondo, ma indubbiamente in alcune esperienze importanti che peraltro tutti voi conoscete in Africa, per esempio, dal Burkina Faso alla Nigeria, al Marocco, in alcune interessantissime ormai anche sperimentazioni in Cina, piuttosto che in Vietnam o in Thailandia. Insomma, in una serie di luoghi del mondo si sta per pezzi, per frammenti, manifestando qualcosa di nuovo, qualcosa di estremamente interessante per chi abbia il problema o il compito di andare oltre rispetto al nostro tempo. All'interno di questo mondo sovvertito, di questa geografia sovvertita, indubbiamente il Sud America è uno dei luoghi che più, a dispetto, devo dire, di una situazione, prima parlavamo con Sebastian anche rispetto al Cile, a dispetto di situazioni politiche e economiche estremamente precarie, come quella che vive il Cile, che vive il Perù, che vivono alcuni stati, l'Argentina dal punto di vista economico, non solo, eccetera, eccetera. A dispetto di questo, una serie però di fuochi importanti si sono manifestati proprio in questo paese. Le motivazioni sono diverse, c'è un'alchimia abbastanza interessante, ci sono alcuni maestri importanti, dal Brasile all'Uruguay, all'Argentina, ci sono stati maestri che hanno in qualche misura introdotto una maniera diversa, non tanto di dettare regole in architettura, ma di sperimentare in diretto rapporto con i luoghi. C'è anche una necessaria e importante distanza rispetto a queste stesse presenze. E c'è una permeabilità anche nell'esperienza di alcuni stati, nell'esperienza architettonica, dico, di alcuni stati, di estremo interesse. Per cui è difficile poi attribuire solo a una nazionalità una maggior sperimentazione in un campo. Certo ci sono alcuni fuochi. Sicuramente il Paraguay è uno di questi. Siamo particolarmente affezionati al fatto che siamo stati anche rispetto al Paraguay uno dei luoghi a Venezia in questa scuola che ha più ascoltato questo nascere anche di fermenti nuovi, ci sembra particolarmente in sintonia con noi. E ancor prima, però, il Cile è stato uno dei luoghi di elezione di questo rinnovamento, diciamo, che avviene su alcuni aspetti e non su altri. Certo, se noi ricercassimo in alcuni luoghi, come alcuni degli stati di cui vi dicevo, alcune delle esperienze d'architettura più recenti, in Argentina, in Paraguay, in Uruguay, in Cile, in Colombia, una particolare capacità di fare i conti con fenomeni urbani spesso disastrosi, lì sarebbe un po' più difficile. Ci sono stati ovviamente alcuni esempi interessanti, pensate a Medellin, pensate a alcuni luoghi che sono stati cambiati anche dall'intervento degli architetti. Però è su alcune altre questioni che si è maggiormente concentrata l'attenzione degli architetti. Su un certo tipo di rapporto col paesaggio, per esempio. Le opere di Sebastian lo esprimono, cioè questa volontà spesso delle architetture, specialmente delle case, poi le case rappresentano la maggior parte delle esperienze degli architetti in questo periodo in Sud America, le scale, le scuole e così via, questa volontà o questa capacità di inquadrare il paesaggio, di completare l'architettura a partire da un rapporto particolare con un paesaggio che viene inquadrato dalle grandi aperture, che viene contornato, che viene sottolineato, sottraendoli spesso a una genericità più complessiva. E così via. Ci sono anche qua delle ragioni e non starò certo a dirle. Il Cile, rispetto alla vicenda del Cile, tra l'altro in qualche misura abbiamo avuto anche delle forme di chiamiamola una parola forte, chiamiamola responsabilità. Cioè questa scuola è stata una scuola che in alcuni momenti, ormai di un passato abbastanza lontano, ha formato alcune figure. Cioè alcune figure come, penso a Alejandro Ravena, penso successivamente a Klotz, ma a Smiljan Radic, sono state formate in questa scuola, per una parte della loro esperienza. Hanno avuto per esempio la percezione o l'idea che la storia fosse una questione importante, che il progetto che riguardava non solo l'ambito specifico del paesaggio ma anche quello delle città fosse una questione importante. E rispetto a questa vicenda, non a caso la vicenda del Cile è forse la più omogenea da molti punti di vista, quello che ha espresso una maggior capacità anche, io la metterei insieme con tante differenze a quella del Paraguay odierno, ma indubbiamente quella del Cile è una vicenda che ha avuto una sua genealogia di grande interesse e ha saputo ramificarsi in tanti personaggi differenti. C'è un ceppo comune, un'idea comune, che è un'idea anche relativa al fatto che l'architetto non sia solo un artefice, ma sia anche qualcuno che debba, come Sebastian, saperne o qualche modo interessarsi di filosofia piuttosto che in generale di una cultura più esterna. Allora, per questi motivi, io penso che sia importante in questo momento guardare con molta attenzione, specialmente per uno studente, specialmente per dei giovani studenti, a queste condizioni, a queste situazioni, che si sviluppano in condizioni di libertà dal punto di vista del costruire, una libertà che per noi è abbastanza difficile praticare, libertà da vincoli, da burocrazie, eccetera, eccetera. Ma proprio per questo, e proprio perché è in prima linea rispetto alle questioni più dure che come dicevo prima, la situazione ambientale o quella sociale pongono, è stata capace ed è capace di rappresentare al meglio una possibile strada, una possibile via. Poi c'è una questione specifica, poi concludo, che nell'architettura di Sebastian Irarrazaval si vede o si può vedere in un modo particolare, è una particolare capacità a fare i conti con qualche cosa che forse molto spesso anche in questa scuola dimentichiamo, cioè che l'architettura è essenzialmente spazio. È essenzialmente la capacità di costruire non solo un'immagine iconica di un certo edificio, ma in qualche misura di ritagliare lo spazio generico, lo spazio indifferenziato, per creare appunto quella sorta di miracolo che avviene quando uno spazio, una porzione di aria poi si trasforma appunto in qualcosa di diverso in cui si possa percepire un benessere di vita. Le case di Sebastian sono un po' questo, sono completate, mirano come dei cannocchiali in alcuni casi al paesaggio, il paesaggio entra e questo paesaggio esterno si completa con un paesaggio interno che proprio da questa relazione appare nobilitato. Beh, io credo che questo sia una questione importante. C'è tutta una vicenda, tra altre cose la stiamo studiando in una tesi di dottorato, che spiega anche un po' questa particolarità dello spazio sudamericano. Ci sono stati dei momenti in cui alcune scuole hanno lavorato su questo. Penso alla scuola di Tucumán in Argentina e a quella di Valparaíso in Cile, in cui il tema di una certa spazialità è stato, in forme differenti, è stato indagato. E anche in questo, a partire anche dagli anni 40, da alcune influenze italiane, c'è stata un legame anche con alcuni importanti passaggi di architetti o storici italiani come Bruno Zevi e come altri che hanno fortemente influenzato questo paesaggio. Insomma, chiudo perché poi ovviamente è la conferenza la cosa più importante, il guardare con attenzione a queste vicende non vuol dire in questo momento semplicemente aggiungere una conferenza alle conferenze che vengono fatte, ma pensare che ci siano alcuni punti di vista che è per noi più importante conoscere e rispetto ai quali anche mediare e mescolare una conoscenza che forse abbiamo più forte da un lato, cioè quella che riguarda le città, la storia, eccetera, ma che sicuramente invece ha bisogno di imparare dall'altro, proprio questa capacità di plasmare lo spazio, di plasmare il paesaggio, che ci viene da questi esempi, che sono estremamente vivi ed estremamente importanti con noi. Tra questi, appunto, l'opera, il lavoro di Sebastian Irarrazaval è fra i più importanti e interessanti e per fortuna abbiamo avuto modo non solo di seguirlo, ma anche di sfruttarlo come professore anche in questa scuola. Grazie.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto, for this introduction and for your kind words. Well, I will speak in English. I understand Italian, but it's a pity I should speak at this. After being here so many times, I will try next time. Well, first, thanks for having me here. It is an honor and a real pleasure to be among all of you in this fantastic city. So special thanks to Professor De Mayo and Professor Bocchi for this invitation, to the Iuav and the Sto Stiftung Foundation, and thanks to all of you for coming and also to the ones that are following this presentation online. I would like to start this presentation with two stories that raises questions regarding the issue that lies behind the title of the seminar, Form Follows Planet. I have to say that I changed the title. I was thinking to talk of the different topics, but I thought that even though it will take me much more effort to do what I'm doing now, that is an opportunity to think or to reaffirm things that probably one does intuitively. No? So I have to thank the opportunity to think about these issues that are so important nowadays and that we as an architect cannot stop to see. So what I think is behind the title of this symposium are awareness and purpose. Those notions that rest today in the theoretical and emotional and stable ground. And it is important to realize that. This is not a stable ground. It's quite unstable from a theoretical and even an emotional point of view for us as an architect. If you allow me to anticipate a conclusion regarding the orientation that should guide our mission in relation to the title of the symposium, I will say that form must follow courtesy. Courtesy is the primary humane attitude that allows us to negotiate the presence of the other. Courtesy organizes and articulates our encounter with the other. Courtesy also organize and articulate the encounter with the other, with the loved ones, with the adversary, with the familiar and the foreigner. Courtesy teaches us how to handle welcoming and rejection. Courtesy teaches us when and when not to touch and the subtle modes of touching. Courtesy teaches how to behave when we are for the foreigners. Courtesy teaches us how to get out of ourselves and be open to the infinite otherness. Courtesy also teaches how to translate the signals of the others, and in this regard we can affirm that to be a good translator and a good architect is to be a perfect host. Finally, the notion of courtesy embraces other notions that will be mentioned during this presentation, such as care, coexistence, inclusion, and co-immunity. Notions that, to overcome the environmental crisis, are more than necessary to cultivate nowadays. Well, the two stories that I wanted to start with, and it's part of the introduction, that a few years ago I gave two lectures on timber construction, one in Sicilia and the other in Arkansas. Same projects, all done in wood, but different receptions. In Sicilia, after finishing the presentation, a man raised his hand and started to insult me for having used, you remember that, Fernanda, and started to insult me for having used timber and having killed 1,000 trees. It was enough to calm his anger to explain that I did not use native trees, but harvest trees, no planted trees. For him, and with very good reason, there was no difference between native and harvest trees. Both were, according to him, living species with the same right to live. Somehow, I felt like a disgusting insect, or if I was wearing a fur coat, no? And the timber building that I was so proud of were mountains of dead elephants. In Arkansas, it was quite the opposite. The lecture took place in an academic seminar on timber construction hosted by the School of Architecture of the University of Arkansas and financed by the Arkansas Timber Association. Timber construction was posed by the lecturers, all of them architects, I mean, very important architects that deal with timber construction, and they were with good argument telling that the only way to solve the climate crisis was to use timber, because data was abundant to prove that the building industry produces a greatest percentage of carbon emissions, like 39%, and that wood had the capacity not only to produce few emissions in the construction process, but also can store other emissions. Also, it was abundant the evangelizing enthusiasm to communicate this sort of divine good news and of this chosen material that has no original sin. Concrete and steel are sinners in this context. But also, with the capacity of this material of wood, that to, like God, to clean other human sins. Well, in a culture where religion, like in the United States, is so strong, it made a lot of sense. But for me, it made me feel suspicious and uncomfortable, more than when outside the auditorium, where around 20 commercial stands of the timber industry animating the coffee break, and the fees for the conference were quite onerous. Well, to put things more complicated, I must add that the territory where the forest industry flourishes in Chile, and from where all the timber of my building come, is understood by some radical groups as the continuation of the colonization process initiated by the Chilean state against the Mapuche nation, the original inhabitant of the south of the country. Let's say good for the people, good for the planet, but for the people. I have to say, as you can imagine, that by then I was so confused and unsure of what was good and bad. Because of this unstable moral ground, I declined to sign an international manifest in favor of wooden construction, but I was not the only one, I have to say. I mentioned these two stories to underline the following. First, that our strategies and methodologies involve ethical assumptions and decisions, and we are responsible for our knowledge assumption and strategies. Therefore, awareness is mandatory to separate the wheat from the rhetorical chaff. Second, that we must learn to live with a sort of feeling of guilt, because no matter how we frame our assumptions, we will blame for our action, because, as in life, in architecture, there is no space for purely inoffensive and neutral performance. We must reach a balance for sure and must be aware of our limitation. I do not consider, as a matter of fact, that all living creatures fight for survival, including humans and trees, and that human groups of individuals, yes, can behave well and have favorable environmental impacts, for example, to harvest trees, to construct buildings and store others' carbon emission on those buildings is a good action. No? We will have to worry, if we don't take that in consideration, we will have to worry very much that, let's say, 50 years from now, using timber as a building material will be as unpolitically correct as it is today to wear a fur coat. And this will be an irrational, fatal error for sure. Having said that, these personal stories show also how important it is to orient our action through awareness founded in data. Action should not be founded exclusively in idealistic and subjective and irrefutable beliefs, let's say the right of the trees, but in the concrete consequence of concrete actions. Facts show that timber construction does reduce and store carbon emissions. And having known this fact, we can say that we are in a good track to preserve life of planets, including trees as well. Of course, there is a moral dilemma. Some trees should die to preserve the planet. If we keep growing, of course, some propose to decrease as the only solution to the environmental crisis, but this takes in another direction. Having mentioned the above, we can affirm that any project is the product of the possibilities and restrictions posed by the following. First, a problem. Second, means at hand to solve that problem. And third, a sense of purpose that leads, orient, and restrict the use of those means. Regarding the first one, the problem, the challenge seems to be very clear and are linked to the following. The survival of the planet is at risk, and the risk is twofold, physical and social. Therefore, there is a climate urgency that brings social urgency as well. They are interconnected. Climate change creates economic, social, and mental health challenges that are opportunities for architects to new approach to design. About the second one, the means, our tool has always been a set of words, no? And those words like walls, doors, floor, roofs, windows, etc., that are required to be arranged following pattern or orientation, ethics and aesthetics. Under modernity, that orientation followed the dogma coined by Sullivan, form ever follows function. But now, it seems that the creed may be instead form ever follow planet. Whatever it means the latter, we only know that form can no longer follow any mechanistic kind of dogma. And why is that? Because, as you know, the mechanist metaphor posed by modernity is no longer useful to figure out and prefigure the only possible world that we are confined to live in. That frame does not help us to understand the telluric shifts in tastes, values, and ultimately the new way of living that arises nowadays, some of them connected with the so-called eco-anxiety, first and then the pandemic after. For the Spanish philosopher Eugenio Trias, this change in taste will explain the fact that in the universe of music, the shares of Beethoven are down while the shares of Mozart are on the rise. Meaning by that today the popular taste is less prone to masculine black and white configurations and much more inclined to trans, gray, and blurred forms, less inclined to a masculine epic of conquer, and more disposed to a female narrative of caring, more open to understand boundaries not as lines, but as territories where binary and mutually exclusionary oppositions are overcome, such as that of anthropocentrism and biocentrism with undesired implications, say, for instance, the assumption that to safeguard and preserve natural environments, you must exclude human, as if humankind as such were the destructive agent responsible for any natural damage. This is kind of embracing of inclusionary thought explain, for example, new ways of naming things and situations that after all prefigure new realities, such as the verb to cohabit that will explain by the very naming of it, that Berlin is nowadays the city with the richest biodiversity in the planet, overpassing the countryside where biodiversity has been reduced by exclusionary practice of monoculture. Same can be said of the use of the word different abilities rather than disabilities. It also creates a new universe of inclusion, of difference, and cohabitation of different cognitive habits. We must remember the strength of language. If the mechanists create from form ever follows function impose the opposite of the mentioned above, such as the use of a unique form for each function and meaning, such as a street only for cars, a street only for pedestrian, windows just for seeing, windows for light, and windows for ventilation only, and different grammatical configuration for every activity and every institution. The slogan, form follows planet, suggests not exclusion, but inclusion. Inclusion in the form of coexistence. If we have a quick look at what is published in well-respected index architectural magazine nowadays, the notion of coexistence and care are paramount. On the one hand, coexistence takes form in the critique of the dichotomy nature-city, human-non-humans, natural-artificial, and its value for promoting the interconnection of habits, co-inhabitants, and habit. Not machines, but plants arise therefore nowadays as the king of the metaphors, to prefigure the world and acting upon it. I am not an expert on plants' behavior and cannot go any deeper in the subject without risking being superficial, but the only thing that I can surely tell is that coexistence and cohabitation open the question of intercultural communication and therefore the need for translation. Since to live is, after all, to communicate, and biodiversity is diversity of language, it follows that the creation of symbolic value necessarily needs to take into account the translation between different languages. If we are going to take seriously coexistence as an enriching opportunity for a better life, we must address translation. So the final question, if we assume that not only living species communicate, but inanimate objects to communicate, is with whom in a post-humanistic world architecture must communicate and how translation will be done to pass from one medium to another. Beyond that, new philosophy trends such as OOO, that is object-oriented ontology, are addressing the communication of inanimate objects in a world where human beings are no longer, as Heidegger posed, the only thinking entities. The last book by Ishiguro, Clara and the Sun, is a fabulous intent to figure out the communication between intelligence no longer attached to biological bodies. In the novel, we stand before the same world, we know, but slightly unfamiliar, because inanimate objects do communicate between them, starting by the tender and smart robot called Clara and his not-so-smart robot friend of the store, where they chat about not too mundane things, such as two yellow cabs waiting for the taxi drivers to stop fighting. This poses new challenges to architecture regarding, as it was mentioned, the process of symbolic production of identity and belonging. With whom in the future are the projects to communicate? Are they going to need to speak 3 tongues simultaneously? Those of humans, people with different abilities, and plants and birds too? Are this language to be perceived visually, or they are going to be merely perceived chemically and will be invisible for us? Soon, for sure, it will not be enough to create ecological corridors for rabbits and foxes to accomplish our ethical mission with responsibility. Much more will be expected from us if we want to stop public insults. On the other hand, the notion of care probably need too much strengthened by emotional reaction to the refutable catastrophic facts and the so-called eco-anxiety, comes to calm an extreme and never seen before sense of vulnerability. We are facing testimony of this sense of fragility not only in the Olympic athletes that, in the name of mental health and self-preservation, renounce the Beethovenian call to conquer, but also in the creation of ministries of happiness, ministries of solitude, and a set of diverse urban strategies to embrace vulnerability through the so-called politic of care, like those implemented in the Madrid City of Care plan that aims at improving life quality of citizens through simple strategies such as the prevention of unwanted loneliness, intervention in the disadvantage of everyday life, and the wellness at the end of life. This fragility has been accentuated in the past 2 years thanks to COVID, as we all know. This worsened vulnerability made us aware of the fact that architecture's main role is to offer immunity against disease and death, and that living together means, as posed by the philosopher Sloterdijk, to create co-immunity. This notion of co-immunity, or community as co-immunity, means to place at the front of our mission the goal to guarantee not just physical, but mental self-preservation. If we must conclude anything from the above before starting to show the projects, is that the call of this seminar is a call for awareness, and that awareness is first about our own condition of being defined by limits. Ethical limits that frame our knowledge and action, and technical limits that define our sphere of immunity for self-preservation. Beyond that, we must conclude that self-preservation actions must be unfolded in the boundaries of the architectonic body and must be guided by notion of care. In doing so, we will honor the name of the seminary, Form Follows Planet, and we will perform our mission with less uncertainty. But the question that remains to ask is where we are going to look for examples, and to what extent we need to be innovative. And this, connects with this idea of the South that was explained in Alberto recently. No? I believe that we must learn that in many cases, if not in all, innovation should not be thought of as a kind of novelty, but as a retrieval of neglected and perhaps archaic way of dealing with vital issues. In that sense, what has been named the rural, or the South maybe, arises as a rich territory to find guidelines and rediscover practices associated to values such as virtue, justice, correctness, honesty, and appropriateness. The projects that I will share with you today gravitate around the already mentioned notions, some with some distance for sure. It's never that easy to connect everything, no? Because in more than architecture projects integrate many aspects. But I will say that they all share the notion of coexistence and care. In a context of increasing, as I said before, vulnerability, and to create a better immunity and better communities, all of them addresses the boundaries of the building as the predominant territory for intervention. Some of them looks for guidelines in the rural world and intend, with less or more success, to be site-specific. I will say that all the projects looks quite different. Probably they share an attitudes, no, and values, and we can say that share what is a design strategy out of repetition. That's probably the only thing that you will see physically that they have in common, and there are values. No? I would like to start then with this planning, which will be the 5 projects. The one is a restoration and conservation of an old building that belongs to a paradigmatic neighborhood from the 1900s, which is called Huemul Library, that is this one. Sorry. The second one is this theater in the south of Chile that was just finished and is waiting to be built. It's called Mataquito Theater, and I will try to focus on this idea of care as self-preservation. This one is an hotel in Patagonia, and this is a house by the sea, beside a protected area. And finally, I will show this school for children with different abilities. So this is the first project then. And I would like to start with this, reading this extract from a book called Bunkering, where some architects were called to say something about the COVID. experience. So during this pandemic, subjected to the confinement decree under the state of exception, I have lost the usual relationship with the outside, and the outside noises have vanished. The predominant sensation has been that of being isolated in a capsule in the middle of a deaf and inhospitable universe, probably like all of us. This sensation has confirmed the idea of Sloterdijk that the primary function of the house is just providing immunity against illness and death. In the middle of this border and vast condition, I have rediscovered the importance of windows and how necessary it is to recover the traditional condition that windows have had as spatial events on the boundaries of the home, a condition that so well pictured Meyer von Bremer in the 19th century. To recover the architectural purpose of windows, the merely functional criterion must be overcome, and in return, they must be designed as places to stay and as settings where unfold, in the words of Eugenio Trias, our frontier being. It comes to my mind remarkable windows of the 20th century architecture, those of Louis Kahn's Fischer House and Paul Wittgenstein's home by Joseph Hoffman, both thought as microspaces of care where the small community of the home at the foot of the abyss unfolds its intimate being. Well, this project is in the middle of a neighborhood from 1900 in what is the center of the downtown in Santiago. And what is interesting about this project, that was the first social project done in Chile. So the condition by then was that there were a lot of people coming from the south of the country, from the agriculture areas, like in many other parts of the world, to live in the cities, And they were living in these very poor conditions with a lot of disease, and the children mortality was extremely high. Also, there were a lot of bad habits, And also, it's interesting how things happen again. There were, of course, epidemic situation. There was this public disinfection process going around. There were riots everywhere, social conflicts, like this one is very famous, at least in Chile. It's called, it was where a lot of people were in a riot, and they were killed by then in Iquique, in the north of the country. So all these things were happening. By then, of course, there were no welfare state, and all the issues that have to do with what we know welfare state were founded in foundations, actually, in what we call ONG now. Well, this project was done by this architect, Ricardo Larraín Bravo, who belonged to the social hygienist movement, and that, as you know, was very important until the modern times. The hygienist movement, as you probably all know, was a trend that was born in the first half of the 19th century with liberalism, and the aim was to tackle all the health problem of the city and to improve, let's say, the condition of its inhabitants. And what was important, of course, was, to have running water, sewers, lighting in the streets, and to be able to control epidemics through ventilation, sun, etc. So this first project was a sort of autonomous project with houses with courtyards, with ventilation, with toilets, with even the materials were imported from Liverpool. And also there were not just housing, but also facilities like this one, which role was to prevent malnutrition of children, also were children and also health problems. So the children were clean here and were also fed and treated. So this was one part of the facility with others. There was a theater as well, and also this building where we were called to create a new library. It's a protected building. We don't have that much in Chile. So it's very particular for us, even though for you probably it's not that old. This is the sort of interior of these spaces, not the house where we're going to do the project. It was totally, I mean, without these sort of elements. Of course, we did an analysis of the structure and so on. I don't want to get that in deep with that. This was the condition of the house. It was totally undermined by additions. So the first strategy was to take out all the things that here are in purple color that were added during the time, no? In order to recover, let's say, the spatial condition of the house. Since we didn't have that much, let's say, in terms of what was designed in that house, we had a look to what was doing during that time, and we have a look to what I mentioned in the previous reading, no? This idea of inhabiting the boundaries of the building and to inhabit the windows, no? And we thought the work of Joseph Hoffman, which is more or less in the same period when the house was done. So this is more or less what we propose. We propose a center, a core for the children. This is a foundation that promotes reading, and for them it's important to attract children because the children bring fathers and and grandfathers to the place. So this is, let's say, the focus, and the proposal so consider this inner space for them, and also, as I mentioned before, to inhabit the boundaries of this old house. This is an area that had changed a lot, was a worker neighborhood at the beginning, and now it's a place with a new population of immigrants. That is something more or less new in Chile. And the strategy was not just to create these places to stay in the boundaries of the house, but also to configure the better condition for reading, no? And that's why there's a lot of timber elements that creates absorbent surfaces. Some images of this interior. And at the core of the building, there is a multi-use space that can be transformed in a micro theater that you are seeing here. And the second floor, we have working spaces for the foundation. This is a section through that micro theater. Well, the second project is the Teatro Mataquito. It's a project that was just finished. And I will say that one of the main features of this building is the idea that form should guarantee endurance. No? So the idea of care is here applied to the shape or the form of the building. No? It's a building that takes care of itself. No? And this is very important when you treat it timber buildings, and also when they are public buildings where maintenance will not exist. Actually, one of the main problems nowadays of public buildings in great parts of the world is how to maintain them, no? How to repair, how to maintain them. So it's a responsibility more than when we use this kind of material to find the way to guarantee the lasting. On time, no? It is in the south of the country, in one of those areas where the timber production flourishes. In the center of the city, we took as a reference, or if you want a sort of translation of the idea of the pagoda. The pagoda is somehow the epitome of the idea of self-preservation and a form that guarantees endurance. That's why it has all these canopies, no? It's protecting the wood. And the other thing that we thought that was very important was to make the boundary of the building a public space, like the Palazzo Rusellino, where care appears like courtesy, and this courtesy is embodied in the relief of daily life discomfort or in the well-being at the end of life that we are seeing here in this picture. So we thought that it was important to introduce in the building. We had done something similar in a smaller project, that is the Public Library of Constitución, where where the idea of courtesy was applied into the facade, in those windows, no? And the idea of a form that preserves the construction is applied to the section of those canopies that you are seeing there. So that's why, actually, why we were commissioned to do the theater was because of the success in terms of the attachment that produced into the community. So around the area, like in most part of the south of Chile, there's not much architecture to have a look as a reference, no, of how to do things. So we have this kind of agricultural construction that can teach us simple things like how to deal with the structural horizontal efforts, for instance, how form can help to develop an appropriate structural performance in the buildings, no? How the way timber is dry can teach us possibility of creating spaces. The only, let's say, big buildings that are there are these kind of silos, no? That sometimes are repeated and they create a rhythm and some sort of order in the landscape. And also there, in this case, the site of the project was connected to an old rail track that connected the city of Licantén with Talca. And there were, we suppose that there were this water tank for the train. So we thought to took inspiration also on that in order to, after repeating each of these elements, we could create a sort of pattern, no, a recognition of the number, where each part of the project could be subdivided in order not only to make understandable the building. I think that the understanding create attachment, no, is part of the beauty, no, the understanding of things. But also we could recognize the program. So the program of the theater will be, as you will see, differentiated in three parts. One for the foyer, one for the seats, and the other one for the scenery. So these are primary intent to solve the problem of stability and also of self-protection. That's why it's open up or wider at the bottom in order to reduce the foundations, to make the form to work structurally. These are preliminary image of the project. And here we are just seeing, let's say, a quite updated section of the building where you can see on the left-hand right the foyer, then the seating area with retractable seats, and then the scenario, and those canopies with this section, actually they are a sort of canopy that avoid, let's say, the water to get into the other surface. And at the same time, on those inverted canopies are hosted all the machinery. Since that somehow we achieved some sort of order through the repetition, we thought that we could treat it different one of them. So the foyer is transparent while the other two volumes are opaque. In terms of the, this is where it is placed. In terms of the plan, it is, let's say, the perimeter is organized like what you saw in the Library of Constitución. There is a long, very long seat with a canopy that protects the people that are seated there, and there is an entrance also protected. And all the areas can be used separately as well, as places to do different activities, no? This is the second floor that can be, I mean, everything can be connected. Here we're starting to see an isometric, a section isometric with the three parts. Some model of the project. Of course, we have a lot of process of so it's called social participation, where they requested a lot of things, and we, of course, were open to include it. In terms of this idea of self-preservation, it is always said that the timber building should have shoes and a hat. no? So here the shoots, like in an animal, are done with concrete. At that center level, it comes the timber, no? And afterward, we have this hut, no? All let's say, the elements that resolve the structural problem in this direction, we have a lot of earthquakes, no? Are treated like in those old airplanes, no? With steel elements. So this is the main entrance with this portico. The sitting area, the sitting gallery, no? This is a public space for meeting, for relief. And this is the interior. We were asked to have let's say, to include some old tradition of the zone, like telling stories, drinking mate. That's why there is this fireplace there. And also this sort of space inside the other space is treated like a carpet with Mapuche motif. No, they were asked also to incorporate, let's say, the diverse habits or diverse cultural belongings in the building. So here we are in the foyer, the sitting areas. Everything is done with CLT and laminated timber. CLT is cross-laminated timber. As you know, there are this huge panel that can have until like 15 meters long that can be cutted. So it's the last kind of technology. Here we have just structural section shows the concrete, no, the sort of foot of the pillars, no, the black parts. The red are the laminated beams, and the black panels are the CLT panels here. Bien, this is an hotel in Patagonia. This was in a competition in the very south of the Patagonia, in a very, we can say, pure or untouched place with very few construction, like that circular shape that you see there, that is called media luna, that are a sort of rodeo, a traditional sport in Chile that is spread all over the country. So for us it was an interesting reference. I've been interested in this kind of archaic figures for very long because of its simplicity, because form also is connected in this case with the structural efforts, no? And also it's a very clear form that reunite, no? So, but this is a sport that is no longer, because of what I mentioned at the beginning, no? It's a sport that is disappearing. I mean, it's not acceptable anymore, so will disappear. Here I'm going a bit, for this just a sort of parenthesis. We had worked a lot under using these archetype rodeo spaces in Chile. We did this studio workshop recently that we presented in the Seoul Biennale that was finished, I mean, a few days ago, where we, after acknowledging that this sport will disappear in a few years, we thought that will be transformed in infrastructure that we call infrastructure for relief, for shelters, no? So these are projects by the students. Also, I had done this project. This is a pavilion, again, somehow translating the structure of the media lunas, no? So I thought that it was also an opportunity to challenge the student to do something bigger in a place where it's quite difficult to build or it's too expensive to build. So we thought that this structure could be infilled by the facilities, the bedrooms of the hotel, and also the facilities. So we proposed this circular building, and in between the structure, we place these models. We have done a lot of work with modular construction. In this case, were wooden models. No? Again, like in the theater, the connection with the ground are done in concrete in order to protect, and same with the theater and the library. There is a roof that protects the wood, no? And there can pass through and dry all the structures and so on. And this is the last project. It's called Juan Luis Undurraga Stimulation Integral Center. It's a school for children with different abilities. This is in the far from the, well, not that far, like 1 hour from downtown Santiago. And for us, it was very important to find the right form that could host all these different abilities. I have to say that when I started the project, I didn't know anything about children with different abilities, and it was full of prejudices. I thought that I had to do everything very easy for them to find where they have to go, etc., etc. And I was told by the director of the school that they had not to worry about that, because these children were formed to be independent persons, no? So nothing was supposed to be easy, no? Except for some of them that were, I mean, that had many problems, no? But was not the case of all of them. So here we have children with autism, with extreme schizophrenia, Down syndrome, and so on. So how we thought we should do the project, we started acknowledging that it was in a very bad neighborhood, extremely bad neighborhood, taken by criminals and drug dealers. And there used to be the school close to there, and the children were given drugs and so on. So the problem of, let's say, affording or creating the condition for a more secure ambient was a very important starting point. So we thought that somehow it should be like a walled city, no, but not a walled city like a jail, if you want, but that within the city, this walled city, should be a lot of freedom to move and for surprise encounters and so on. We had a look to the work of Chillida. I will explain why. Because somehow he worked with, he works like with the penetration of, and also the extension of the perimeter, no? And what allows the extension of the perimeter in terms of an architectonic project is to isolate the rooms, in this case in terms of noise, no? It allows not to having the noise passing from one room to the other, that in this case is a very important problem. And also, well, actually, in your lecture that you prepared, Renato, there was a very important presentation about Chillida. It was very important for me, having been there. And I don't remember the name of him, but he was explaining that Chillida was very impressed by ports. Ports, by default, have a lot of perimeter, no? And somehow they create the possibility of, let's say, that some things enter into the other, no? And also, most of the project or these engraves by Chillida has this condition of somehow having a very strict outer frame and then a more free interior interstitial spaces, no? And the other characteristic in terms of the easiness to do a translation to architecture is that the elements, this relationship between voids and fill, somehow the size is repeated, no? So it's a repetition, no? but at the same time create a variation out of a very simple move. Of course, it's not that easy to do that sort of translation. We start with one of the making a lot of tries with one of these graveyard and engraving, and we start extruding easily. We get to these first preliminary drawings. Here is much random that it finished at the end. But here we can see what we wanted, that to have this very strict frame outside and a more free movement inside, with the possibility that those interstitial spaces could get the possibility to move through them, but also to get light and view to the interior common spaces that you will see and will be much more clear when I show the plans. So these are initial, as I said, initial drawings. But here is the project already finished. So as in any citadel, there are a few towers. One tower is connected to administration, the one on the right. The other one is part of the chapel. The program considers classrooms, also consider a swimming pool, consider, of course, a space for the teachers. And what I was surprised that they told me that the teachers were much more stressed than the children, so they needed a sort of kind of oasis to relax and to have a sort of moment of silence, no? So the organization, the general organization, consider on the right-hand side of this aerial view the administration with its own kind of oasis space. After a group of rooms, of a classroom, then the multi-use rooms, and at the end, rooms for the people with much more problems, children that cannot move, and they need to be close to the swimming pool and to the bus that brings them to stay there. So we are seeing closer views. The plans, as I said, on the right-hand side was the administration, then the classrooms, then artists, multi-use spaces, and then this special space for children with much more problems that they cannot move easily. They need wheelchairs, and so they're close to the swimming pool. That is what you see on the top, no? And close to the buses there. So this is the kind of plan where you can realize that these interstitial spaces do not only separate the rooms in order to avoid the noise passing, but also allows the exterior views to enter into the corridors. No, there is these corridors at the core of this group of rooms, so the views and the light enters through them. For us, what was also very important in terms of creating the better condition for staying in that room, to balance the light. So that's why you are seeing this amount of skylights that are on top of the roof. No, they are in the opposite to the windows in order to balance the light and not tire the view. No? The other important feature of this kind of organization is that allows to each room to control the other one. Nowadays, it's a great problem. They are because they are very, very stressed. The professor, they now use cameras, etc., in order to, if there is some problem, they have testimony and so on. But here we wanted to let's say, to produce this interconnection. So from one room to the other, everything is somehow visualized and controlled. So the shape also allows the control of every classroom. So there is way, as I said, it contains this very strict way of moving in the perimeter that is covered, no, with those covered space. But at the interior, one can move more freely and access to the classroom through these spaces that I said. So these interstitial spaces allow to enter here, but also allows to one that are in the corridor to get the light of the exterior, no? And so it's not a secluded corridor, no? Like those American kind of schools. Here we're seeing on the left-hand side the chapel. Some view of the exterior of the tower of the chapel. Those are the covered corridors, no, that create this boundary to this difficult neighborhood. That's the area protected for the teachers. That is this one. And this is the inside of the tower of the church. Well, I think I have a few conclusions here that I want to, if I find it. Well, if I must conclude anything from the above, no, sorry, it's somehow here, sorry. I lost the conclusions. I will find it. Give me a second. Here I have it. Okay. Well, if I have to make a conclusion, we haven't said that the first lesson concerned the need for developing innovative approaches, no? I say innovative, we have got used to think of innovation as something that has to do with bringing about effective solutions to existing or new requirements, solutions that were not available at the point of time of their eruption. In this sense, the current concept of innovation as an offspring of the modern concept of the new, the brand new, with this implication of relentless progress and certainty of continuous growth. We must learn that in many cases, if not in all, innovation should not be thought as a kind of novelty, but as a retrieval of neglected and perhaps archaic way of dealing with vital uses. I may say that Mataquito theater, in this case, lies beyond what we call disciplinary barriers, but also integrate different forms of knowledge across cultural and historical boundaries. We can learn so much from ancestral forms that continue to exist and to be transmitted and practiced in marginalized enclaves of our world. Another lesson concerns what I could call a site-specific orientation that is clearly explicit in all the projects that I have shown. I mean a site-specific orientation that is not neglectful of global issues, but does not target them on a merely generalizing standpoint. This site-specific orientation addresses those issues on a transversal basis, which validate the heterogeneous nature of the diverse sites and at the same time pinpoint the critical spot of the articulation with the global context. In this sense, site-specific do not mean merely local, as if local were a designation for a self-contained and stable organism. It means rather a significant difference within a constellation of diverse and multi-determinate elements, among them institutions, organization, legislation, etc. If I'm not wrong in my appreciation of this feature, I will say that, as evidenced by many of the projects, give us light on the political relevance of concretely related intellectual work in general with social experience, social interest, and responsible social action. This is a kind of ethics of knowledge that I find most inspiring. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, thank you very much, Sebastian, for this very intense and very thick lesson. I think it's it's quite difficult to resume the themes because you put on the table a very wide range of arguments, and I think it's really interesting also your introduction, your theoretical introduction about the general theme, form follows the planet. And so what is, I think, more interesting for me is that you say in a passage, not to be dogmatic, not to accept a formula. And so you demonstrated as this formula in reality may be differently argumented in relationship with the various programs, the various situations, and so on. And this is interesting. It's also interesting, I think, I was thinking to compare the different position we are experimenting in this November talk. For example, the first talk by Bernard Curie dealing with very hard contest like Beirut and the war and the disasters and so on, works on a position more characterized, more strong also, and I was really interested in your proposal to say form follows courtesy. It's a completely different position to find a more soft but more intense and empathic relationship with the planet and with the things. And it's very interesting also to compare these problems, and probably also depending also different cultures, formation and so on, of course. I think it's also interesting you managed different materials, different compositional patterns and so on, but with a very, very strong relationship with the tradition, with the culture, with the... what is interesting, I think, in your work is nothing is casual. Nothing is, it all is depending on very, very strong and precise studies of the culture of the site, of the culture of the human beings, and developing. And this is, I think, is very interesting position also for the student, because it's important to think that forms is only the last result of a very, very long process, and so it's really interesting. And for example, it's interesting your large use of timber construction and tradition. This is quite interesting also thinking of the Biennale in this moment in Venice. No? There's this Mapuche construction and you evoked this, you said before, you evoked also this archaic tradition, but renovating it, and so it's, I think it's very interesting. Well, I think it's also interesting this emphasizing this problem of eco-anxiety, you say, because I think it's very important for us thinking the problem of the climate change, the ecology, and so on is sure, but it's also important not to be anxious about it. And so I think it's correct, because maybe our answer may be too banal in a way. And so I think your deepness is really interesting about. I was also surprised of your new production. I didn't know many of these buildings and projects, but I think the evolution is really interesting, and I want to remember also to the student all the background of your very young career, but it's really very interesting background. Alberto was remembering your strong interest in the relationship with the landscape, for example, but I had many empathies with and affinities with your research. Unfortunately, I'm not so a good architect, but I try to work on very precise affinities with your research. For example, I had a long research with Alberto and Fernanda and others about recycling, and I remember your work, very interesting work, like the famous Oruga house and so on. Recycling containers, but in a way not to reuse simply objects, but transforming it in very astonishing forms. And so this is very interesting. There's no simplicity, a montage of things, but there's also this possibility in your work to evoke more general things. And so, and of course, I have a very large affinity in your interest in the relationship between art and architecture. You mentioned now Chilida and so on. It's really interesting. The name of this scholar was Cosme de Baragnano, I think, because I remember we had a very nice occasion to discuss together in Querini Stampaglia some years ago in a seminar entitled La materia del vuoto, and I remember Sebastian was very, very interesting contributor in that case, and we had the possibility to discuss about this one. And of course, this relationship with landscape also is a character which is common with us, but with a very precise way to have a relationship with the landscape, which is not mimetic. It's simply a possibility of interpretation, thinking of the tools of architecture, and so I think it's really interesting. I would like also to remember, I think it's may be interesting to mention that in your studying, in your first phases, you had, for example, I remember I read of your background, you had this master who was quite famous in Italy when I was a student, Rodrigo Perez de Arce, who was published on Lotus many, many times, and it was a theorist quite interesting because quite revolutionary also, because he was working about this problem of managing space in architecture and in the city, and making these strange exercises, revolutionary exercises about Le Corbusier or Louis Kahn, I remember, and reversing the space and so on. And I think it's interesting also to remember there's probably a paternity of some studies also. And it's interesting for me also your starting with a particular interest in literature and writing, and it's also common for me. I'm probably I worked more on writing than on projects, but I think it's interesting. You chose architecture as a humanistic place where cultivate also these interests, and this is common also for me. And so I am divagging, but there are many subjects very interesting, and so it would be nice to hear if there are some intervention by the public and some questions, if you like. We have a microphone.
Yes, I think that if you have any question, you can pose to Sebastian some question. I have one.
Okay.
So prepare your question. I start with one, and is this. I visited with you some of your architecture some years ago, and now I have seen that the house you show us, you designed the entrance from the upper roof, no? From the roof. And I think this is quite usual in your work. because when we were in Colico house, in the,
Oh, yeah, it's true.
this is the same, no? The approach to the site was from the upper, and then you go down, you enter in the house, and from the stairs, and then you go, and you also design this strange and a little bit asymmetric courtyard. I don't know what to say, but very small courtyard, and then you go around the stairs. And also in the Caterpillar house, no?
Same. Yes,
It's
true.
the same. You enter from the upper. But in these two cases that I know, the construction is on the slope, no? It's on the hill, so you need to find a way to approach the site, to discover the site from the inner space and also from the outside. But what is very special is that you try to design a sort of itinerary. It's the same for the house on the sea that you show us. Is on the
Yeah, there is a
is
slope.
the house built on the
Yes,
slope?
There is a slope, yeah. It's subtle,
Okay,
but
because
it's slope.
this was not so clear, or not for me. So you need to arrive from the upper level
Yeah.
and then to discover.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You want me to comment on that? Yeah. Do you want me to comment on that? Yes? No, because I mean,
Yes, if
of
there
course,
are, if for
there
you
are
it's
contextual conditions because since we have the Andes mountain all along the country, things that do not happen in Argentina, no? That everything is more or less flat. There is a slope. So always we have to deal with the slope. Of course, one can solve the entrance not like that, no? But somehow, in all the project, the site that you mentioned, of course, the landscape is very interesting, very nice, etc. But this is not the only reason. But the other reason is that somehow, entering that way, one immerse in interior landscape, if you want, like Alberto was mentioning, no? Probably that accentuate that condition, no? The fact that you enter from and you immerse yourself in a new condition, no? In a new landscape. It's not what is outside, no? The outside is fantastic, but it will be there and will not move, no? But the house or the project creates their own landscape, no? That of course interact with what is outside, but I think that's the main reason. And also because, I mean, we experience can sound obvious, but we experience things with our bodies, no? And I think this is the primary before the mind, how we experience mostly aesthetic experience, no? Like architecture or music or whatever, no? It's the first, I mean, it's the passport to enter into the architectonic experience for me, and mostly in that kind of conditions, no? So, yeah, I think it's a starting point.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anybody else has a question.
Hi, Sebastian.
Make it easy.
Yeah, no, of course, it was super interesting. I think that one of the crucial point also for the studio, no, was the image of the collage of the three silos. That was in some way as a superpower to then explain the translation of that images to the final project, no? And it was kind of important to really get into your, I don't know if I can call you method, but in some way the strategy that you use, that you teach at the studio. I have a question because it's true that the form is not the goal at the very end, not the form of the building, but in some way I also see that it is quite important to arrive at a form that in some way can resemble or represent the archaic shape of some object that you find in the landscape, because for example, the hostel it is quite strong, the fact that at the very end the form is something that that anyone has already perceived in the landscape. So the question in some way is, I understand that the form is not the goal, but there's a kind of attention to don't lose like the archaic element from what you have started. And also for the silos, I mean, the theater is a perfect representation of a form that then you can again find in the landscape. So it's a kind of a reinvention of something like that. So, I mean, it's not that bad if the form in a way it's important also as a goal, in my opinion. And I want to ask you if you, in the process, you are trying to keep kind of attachment to the initial elements.
Yeah, very good question. Thanks, Alessandro. Because the first, I mean, first of all, for me it's very important that buildings create somehow bridges with where they are located, no? In that sense, to be site specific. And why is that? Because in some way, I mean, somehow it has to do with the idea of courtesy, no? That you behave somehow when you are a foreigner. You have to behave somehow, no? It's not, you don't behave like when you are at home, no? So somehow those kind of projects are foreigners, no? In that places. They come with all the different needs. Of course, they relate with global issues, with the architectonic discipline that has nothing to do with places, no? That architectonic has its own rules and so on. But for me, it's a way to create that bridge. So every time I go to some places, and mostly because there are no architectonic reference on those sites, I go and see what is there, what is built there. No? And in order to create that translation and be connected with the site. Sometimes there is much difficult. For instance, in the case of Talagante, where the school was placed, I mean, the reference comes from the art universe, no? Because we are in a sort of a scenario more detached, no, with not so strong reference and so on. And probably it's also limitation. For me, it's very hard to start from scratch. So, and I think the process of doing, I mean, change the things a lot, no? You can start from a cycle, but the size will make all the difference. The use will make a lot of difference. So the specificity will arrive always, no? Because of very, I mean, somehow banal stuff, no? Like the techniques and, no? And of course, this should be guided, no? By like those principles that I talked at the beginning and so on. But yes, form is, of course, is important. But not, I'm not trying to make every project the same. Sometimes when I was organizing this, say, all the projects are different. I mean, I'm trying always to, I mean, if it was about timber construction, more or less everything is coherent, but it has the same material, it's easy, no? But I think since they are site-specific, they start from different points, they have different clients, sometimes the materials are not the same. In the case of Talagante, for instance, timber was not a possibility posed by the client, and that's it, no? No possibility to do it in timber, and so on. So, I mean, there are many, many vectors that somehow move things in one direction, but one thing is important, to be aware of the relations that the project, that the objects, if we can call object architecture, I don't like the word very much, but somehow for me it's very important the values that are behind, and also what they do, the interrelation that the project creates, and something that is always there, probably sometimes, if I tell, will be easy to see it, but this idea of repetition, that's basically is a design strategy that allows for for having an economy in design, having an economy in the construction supervision, and having an economy of perception as well, that I think is very important. It creates a sort of a restless, or not restless, the opposite, sort of peaceful space, no? Where the expectations somehow are, like in music, they are satisfied. No? And for me, it creates a sort of wave of inhabiting. So if I could say that is something that is common to all the projects, even though from the superficially it looks different, they have this strategy tool that is the same for all of them. No?
Any more questions? Yes, Paola?
Good night. I have two simple questions from the school, about the school. The first, the project was developed with the pedagogist, with the teacher, with the collaboration of director of the school. The second, are school for children with difficult, very common in Chile? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Yes, the project was done with the director and an assistant of the director, so all the conversation were done with her, and of course we have different feedbacks. We did a lot of interaction with them, and no, there are not that many those kind of schools. There is a foundation, it's called Teleton, that has many of them, but it's the only one. And this is, there are not that many. It's something, of course, new, and of course has to do with this naming of things, no? Calling different abilities and disabilities, and of course in these new cultural shifts in favor of inclusion and so on. But I will say that the schools, private schools and public schools are incorporating children with different abilities, no, in the common school. But this is very precise, no. Yeah, for children that are no longer allowed in the common schools to be, no, children with high level of schizophrenia. No?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
Teleton, sì, è un circuito.
It seems to me you are particularly interested in many projects in this space of relations, not space simply, but in interacting. This is the school problem, but it's also the civic problem and so on. And I remember you worked also with Faiferi in Sardinia about this research about schools.
Learning space.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear how do you think maybe this problem, which is also the problem we have here, to have a relationship between dal palco alla sala.
Yes. Well, I think that's we can resume what architects do. We create relations, no? And we use form for that purpose, no? To create relation between the inhabitants inside, and also we create relation what is outside. And what I have somehow discovered that works for me is in order to create those relations or accentuate this idea of relation, it's important to work with the perimeter and to create the bigger perimeter as possible. No, so that's in the school. We have that in the project that it didn't show now, but even in the section of the theater or the public library or in the two-way house project, I mean, the perimeter in this case is very extended in order to produce relation. I would say that they create, maybe some can sound a bit pompous, but not relation of dominance, but some sort of what can we call parietal relation. In the case of the two White House, probably you know the red one, no? It creates, because of the huge perimeter, a relation with the landscape that puts us in relation with the trees and with the exterior, not in a relation of dominance that can be probably the result of a villa, a more compact, even though the villas has a lot of perimeter, so it's a bad example, but in a more compact kind of building, no? Where the relations probably are less evident, no?
Other questions?
We're okay.
We are free. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
everybody.
your
Grazie,
attention.
Sebastian.